A famous writer is having an important event today. The room where it is to take place is quite crowded. Apparently, this author has a lot of admirers. That's right, there's a book signing with author Michelle Haley today. Michelle Haley is 32 years old and a travel writer. And now this lovely young lady was signing another book for her fangirl named Polly. Polly raved about how she is a huge fan of Michelle's work and bought 2 books at once, one to read and one to keep. Then the girl started asking Michelle to take a picture with her, explaining that it was her life's dream. The writer happily agreed. 2 smiling girls plus 1 smartphone and a wonderful keepsake photo was ready. Many other visitors, enlivened by Michelle's good mood, also wished to take a photo. The girl tried not to refuse anyone. Meanwhile, in the women's restroom, there was an active discussion of the writer. Girls were discussing Michelle's appearance. A girl named Stacy Smith especially admired the beauty of the writer, wondering if it is possible to be so beautiful without any care and plastic surgery. The other was named Judy Evans, and she was scrolling through Michelle's Instagram feed, noting that Michelle looked exactly the same in her old photos. Stacy wondered aloud that the author had an Instagram page. Judy suggested that her friend look at it with her. Judging by her profile photo, Michelle has been to Switzerland and seems to be earning quite well. The girls noted that the author is good as a model and takes good pictures. Among other things, Michelle was also an excellent cook. Friends actively looked through the tape of photos and no less actively discussed everything they saw. In one of the photos, the girls saw Luke Martin, Michelle's boyfriend. The girls concluded that Michelle was driving around the world and writing about traveling, spending her boyfriend's money on all this. Now their discussion had a hint of judgment. Laughing, one of them added that Michelle is absolutely nobody without her Luke Martin. Michelle Haley happened to be in one of the restroom stalls at the time and became an unseen witness to the discussion of herself. She was slumped over and frustrated. Michelle was wondering if she should have kicked the door open now and walked out. Meanwhile, while the writer was deciding whether to go out or not, the girls remembered that they might be late for the movie. Finishing their conversation, they quickly left the restroom. Michelle stepped out of her stall and stopped by the mirror in thought. She had started traveling while still a student, occasionally in between part-time jobs. Long before Luke became famous, she had let him live in her little room. Thinking about everything that had just been said was driving the girl to despair. Michelle painted her lips, looking sadly into her mirror reflection. Yes, that was her Michelle Haley, 32 years old, travel blogger, travel writer, camping expert. She had many names, but her most important name was Luke Martin's girlfriend. With a pile of bags, Michelle finally arrived home. She looked tired. She was met at home by Luke. He wondered aloud at the number of packages the girl had, and said she should have called him to help. Michelle replied that it wasn't hard on her. Michelle set the packages on the table and began to sort through them. "Ta-da! Here's one for us," the girl announced happily as she pulled out a gift from one of her readers. It was a cheese set and a bottle of wine. Luke stroked Michelle's hair and cheerfully remarked that she had been so nervous before her first fan meeting and came in with her arms full of food. Michelle laughed, and the guy asked if there had been any incidents today. The girl suddenly became thoughtful. Luke kept asking if any of the guys were making eyes at her or asking for her phone number, and in Michelle's head echoed the words of those girls that she was nobody without Luke Martin. However, she didn't voice it out loud, but simply said that nothing like that happened today, because almost all of her fans are girls. "Well, thank goodness," the guy said with relief. The girl was surprised, reminding the guy that he too called such girls fans after all. Luke hugged Michelle gently, pulling her to him, and explained that he was just worried about her, because his girlfriend was the most beautiful. Looks like he said that just for show, and he's not really worried about it himself. With these thoughts, Michelle decided to just bury what had happened today inside her. She decided not to say anything to Luke about that conversation in the restroom, even though she felt bad about it. Evening came. Lights were on in the windows of the high-rise everywhere. The gift wine was on the table, along with a printed cheese set, and the glasses were emptying little by little. A tired Michelle, a little tipsy, began to just fall asleep right at the table. Luke noticed that the girl was sleepy and said that he should brush his teeth and go to bed. Michelle answered him the following: "I don't want to, cab driver. Please take me to my room." The guy smiled with a sigh and walked up behind Michelle. "Oh, for once I'll serve you," he invited her with a gesture. Michelle jumped into the guy's arms with a nimble leap, and he picked her up with an equally nimble motion. Hey, drive carefully, the girl joked. Of course he would be extremely careful. Luke carried the girl into the bedroom and gently placed her on the bed. It seemed that he wanted to leave soon, and Michelle, on the contrary, did not want to let him go. She carefully inquired when Luke was going to sleep. He was still going to write, after all, and promised to go to bed after he'd gotten some work done. Although his girlfriend looked very tempting right now, but work was more important at the moment. Michelle ran her finger over his lips. Do you have to turn in your work faster? She asked. Luke looked at the girl lying there. Oh yeah, she was gorgeous. That long, thick hair strewn carelessly across the pillow, her eyes, her neck, her breasts. Everything about her was beautiful. The guy tried to quickly avert his gaze and stared somewhere in thought. Michelle saw his puzzlement and thought that he must really have a lot of work to do. She lifted herself off the bed and tried to put her arms around Luke. She moved closer to the guy's lips and kissed him gently, thanking him in this way for the cab. Michelle let him go, asking him not to strain himself too much. Luke seemed so confused for some reason. Saying goodnight, the guy left the room. The door closed behind him with a creak. Michelle closed her eyes as soon as he closed the door behind him. However, sleep did not come, and the girl was flooded with memories of how it all began with Luke. It's worth telling their story briefly. Michelle and Luke are 32-year-old peers. He's a fiction writer, she's an essayist, and at first they both dreamed of writing novels, except only one's dream came true. Michelle, starting back in high school, had been following one blog on a regular basis. Then she was very surprised that the author of the blog had already managed to gain fans, although he was a newcomer in this business. From the way the novels were written, Michelle assumed that he was at least a student. However, it came as a big shock to her to find out that she and he were peers. This came to light when he mentioned on his blog about his upcoming mock exams and math entrance exams. Michelle suddenly felt a kind of closeness with him, and that was the reason why she started to try writing too. When the girl found out that he was enrolled in the same university as her, the girl had a plan. What if she met him right in front of the university? That would be a great idea. The plan worked and they met. They shared a dream of becoming writers, so they soon started dating. And since their 20s, the two have never parted once, and so it's been 12 years. The time flew by so amazingly quickly. Michelle lay awash in memories. 12 years, as planned, Luke Martin made a name for himself as a fiction writer. Michelle realized as a travel writer. It worked out perfectly. Where else would you find a couple like them? Each of their days begins in a living room filled with sunshine. They brew themselves a couple cups of morning coffee together. After their morning chit-chat, they usually retire each to their own room to work. There seems to be nothing they miss. That's what this couple's peaceful routine was like. However, there was still something that made the girl wonder. How long had it been since their last time? It seemed like a week or two, roughly. With these thoughts, Michelle began to explore her body. A couple weeks without intimacy was a lot for her. The girl's hand slowly moved lower and lower. She really missed love and affection, and now even these touches on herself were driving Michelle crazy. Her whole body was filled with desire, and why, ignoring it, should she fall asleep in this room alone? Michelle stopped herself from thinking that she had just had too much to drink, and on just trying to sleep. But restless thoughts prevented her from doing so. There were some questions that had been bothering Michelle a lot lately. She often hung around and worried about being a burden. Even now, instead of sleeping, she was pondering. Why on earth wasn't anything happening? There seemed to be some kind of stagnation in her and Luke's relationship. What made Michelle wonder was that even though they had been dating for 12 years and were only 32 years old, marriage was never even discussed. Is that normal? A new, beautiful, and sunny day came. Michelle woke up and the first thing she did was to check her phone for new notifications. What she saw literally threw the girl into shock. It was so unexpected for her that Michelle screamed throughout the apartment. At this wild scream, a worried Luke flew into the room. With all his might, he opened the door and asked what had happened. What could have made the girl scream like that? Maybe she was scared of some bug, Luke thought as he rushed to help. Michelle looked confused and emotionally excited. With eyes shining with happiness, she informed Luke that she had been invited to be on television. Michelle literally had it written all over her face how excited she was about the invitation. Luke looked at the girl questioningly. He thought that she had been invited for an interview again, but she had already given it twice. Michelle stated that this was not an interview, and she had been invited to be a regular panelist. She explained that it is a new program on the SBC called Campfire Conversations. It involves overnight camping in the country, and yes, it is supported by the Ministry of Tourism. The girl could not believe her happiness. Emotions just overflowed her to the brim. She jumped on the bed with happiness. At last, what she dreamed of would happen. The girl had a chance to take part in this show. Wow, amazing. Michelle thought that it wouldn't hurt to take up Pilates again, since she would be on TV. Of course, she really wanted to be in shape. Luke hadn't said a word the whole time. He seemed to be thinking about something before he made his point. After some thought, he told Michelle that she shouldn't make any hasty decisions, explaining that she didn't even know what kind of program it was. Michelle didn't expect such a reaction from the guy. His words made her think too, instantly spoiling that joy at the news. Luke clarified that what he meant was that he shouldn't be so careless about his reputation. He reminded the girl of her longtime dream of writing novels. I wonder what the real reason was for him trying so hard to talk Michelle out of television. Michelle assured the guy that she would definitely think things through before making a decision. She also emphasized that her manager would have the final say either way. She thought about how long it had been since she had last taken up romance. "Well, congratulations," Luke said dryly, and without much joy, and called Michelle to breakfast. The girl just sat on her bed for a while, not understanding why Luke reacted the way he did to this news. She was surprised at the tone in which he voiced his congratulations. "I love Chicken Cafe." Melanie Brickman, the first assistant director, asks the second assistant director named Jan Dahman what is known about Michelle Haley. Jan replied that Michelle promised to get in touch as soon as she could spare some free time. In turn, Jan inquired about the second participant. Melanie reported that the second one had been confirmed to participate in the filming. A director-producer named Holly Brown was also sitting at the same table as the assistants. She laughed nervously, expressing aloud her confidence that they would all definitely show up. She thought that ordinary people who weren't even entertainers wouldn't dare miss their chance to be on television. Holly reminded the assistants that this was her debut on the show, and she had waited so long for it. They only nodded silently in response to her words. She stood up from her seat and excitedly said that she had only gotten this far because of her unwavering will. Holly added that without the help of her assistants, nothing would have been possible. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she asked her assistants to help her put on a top-notch show. The assistants hugged their manager, promising to help her in everything and to be with her till the end, under any circumstances. Meanwhile, the waiter was just bringing the team their order, boneless chicken with green onions. Michelle decided to go to the TV station. Driving up to the high-rise building, she thought about the fact that she hadn't been here for a long time. The girl was a little nervous at heart. At home, all her conversations with Luke about participating in the show had ended before they started. In the end, she gave up on the idea of changing the guy's mind. It was clear from the look on his face that it wasn't the most desirable topic of discussion. Walking into the TV station building, Michelle pondered that, to some extent, Luke's words about how it might affect her reputation might be true. But she was still willing to take the risk. With a confident gait and a smile on her face, the girl walked towards her dream. At the gatehouse, Michelle was asked to issue a guest pass. Standing in front of the door, the girl thought, "I wonder who the other participants are, celebrities, or maybe writers like her." A couple seconds of indecision, and Michelle opened that door after all. "Ah, you're just in time," Melanie Brickman exclaimed happily. The assistant introduced the others to the last contestant, writer Michelle Haley. Everyone's attention was drawn to the young woman who entered. Michelle smiled sweetly, estimating the number of participants by her glance. Smiling embarrassedly, the girl remarked aloud that she seemed to be the only latecomer. Holly Brown reassured Michelle that she was just in time and introduced herself, giving her name to the girl. Assistant Ian brought Michelle the shooting schedule to review and offered Michelle something to drink. The girl thanked and asked for green tea if available. The participants were then asked to introduce themselves. The first to briefly introduce herself was Michelle. Next was the writer, Derek Babcock, age 41. Magazine editor, Emma Black, 33 years old. The model, Logan Carey, 27 years old. Michelle wondered why they needed a model. She mentally assumed it was for the visuals. But did a show like this really need a pretty face? After 5 hours of discussing proposals and a shooting plan, Holly suggested that their first general meeting be over. She expressed her satisfaction that it had been possible to get the full cast together, get off to a good start, and not waste any time. She also announced to everyone that this was her first project, and it had been a huge effort to achieve. Holly bowed to the participants of the meeting, asking them to take care of the success of this project with their joint efforts. The assistants ran up to Holly and smilingly remarked that their director is working very hard. Just yesterday she was crying, and today she seems to be crying. Everyone was about to disperse, but Ian stopped the participants. He informed that they had organized a corporate party for everyone. This was so that everyone could get to know each other better before the filming and not feel awkward in their work. Jan invited everyone to be sure to join in. Michelle, just in case, said she was driving. However, they were promised to pay for the cab and all expenses and were very much asked to stay. Michelle didn't really want to refuse, so after deciding to go to the corporate party, she decided to put Luke on notice as well. Michelle sent him a text explaining that she would be late tonight. The BKC Chicken Cafe is where the corporate party is being held. Everyone is already gathered around the table. Screenwriter Derek was praising their suave director, saying he'd never met people like this before. Emma, the editor, was in complete agreement. She commented that an attitude like Holly's makes you want to work even harder. Holly was touched by the general sentiment. She suggested that the team members order something else. Michelle was very excited about going to the corporate event. It had been a long time since the girl had been to such noisy and fun parties. She drank and had fun with the others, without pinching herself in anything. Oh, what's she suddenly feeling so bad about? Michelle seems to be dizzy. Thinking she could use a breath of fresh air, Michelle staggered towards the exit. Logan looked back at the girl as she walked away. Michelle stepped outside and leaned against the high railing of the balcony. Yeah, she wasn't feeling too good, but still the fresh air eased Michelle's condition a bit. "Miss Ryder," someone called out to the girl from behind. Michelle turned around. It was that young guy, a model named Logan, and he carefully brought the girl her coat. Logan carefully put it on the girl's shoulders, asking her to be careful because it was very easy to catch a cold on a day like this. Michelle was surprised, but thanked the guy. Logan, she was very familiar with his name. He is famous as a model and has absolutely nothing to do with literature. I wonder how he managed to get cast. Maybe he was just pushed through by the agency, Michelle thought. Logan, standing next to the girl, admitted that he was her fan. Oh, that's news. Michelle was very surprised by his confession. However, Logan wondered aloud why she was so surprised since Michelle Haley is quite famous. Wow, another man was added to Michelle's fan list. That made Michelle very happy. She explained to Logan that this is exactly why she was surprised that her fans are predominantly women. "What are you guys talking about? There it is. I have all 4 of your books, Miss Ryder," Logan excitedly informed her. With a wave of her hand, Michelle emphasized that she only had 3 books, including her recently published essays. Logan inquired if that didn't include a collection of fantasy short stories. Logan explained that he'd bought it because Michelle Haley was listed as an author. He wondered if there could be another author with the same name. What surprised Michelle was that the guy might have known about her co-authoring the book. Of course, she knew what Logan was talking about. Apollo was a collection of short stories written by 10 aspiring writers, including Michelle. But after all, even her fans don't know about this book. Indeed they do, the girl agreed aloud. Michelle then made a theatrical bow to Logan, apologizing for being prejudiced against her, as it turned out, most genuine fan. The girl felt embarrassed that she had acted like that when he was being all heart-to-heart with her. However, she was still pleased that her work had such an admirer in the person of Logan. As Michelle bowed, the guy was worried if she was crying. The girl smilingly objected that she had no reason to cry, and on the contrary, she felt happy. Logan was glad to hear that. "Almost no one knows about my affair," Michelle said, and Logan suddenly leaned sharply right into the girl. He suddenly covered the girl's mouth with a hard kiss. Michelle froze dumbfounded. She then sharply pushed Logan away from her, shocked at his insolence and cavalier attitude. The girl yelled out that she had a boyfriend and resented his antics like that. For a moment, Logan stood at a loss for such a violent reaction to the kiss. Then he smiled smugly. He looked Michelle straight in the eye and said, "Well, it's okay. I have a girlfriend too." Michelle still couldn't recover from the shock as the guy came close to her again, pulling her close to him. He pulled Michelle to him again and kissed her harder and longer than the first time. Michelle returned home and entered the apartment, slamming the door. She quickly stripped off her clothes, then flopped down on the bed with a heave. Everything that had happened at today's corporate party was now trying to completely overwhelm her thoughts. The girl ducked her head into the pillow and tried to convince herself that nothing had happened today. Nothing happened, she repeated to herself mentally, trying to chase away the intrusive images. It was late at night, and sleep was hard to come by. No matter how long the night seemed, the morning always came after it. This time, the morning was sunny and clear. At breakfast, Luke asked what time Michelle had returned yesterday, since he hadn't waited and had fallen asleep. The girl replied that she didn't come in particularly late. The guy informed her that the editor was due at 5 today. Michelle listened to Luke superficially, trying to convince herself that it was an ordinary morning. Yesterday was still troubling her thoughts. Michelle tried to feign joy at the news of the editor's impending arrival, but she was still feeling like she had committed some kind of crime. The girl was terribly embarrassed. Luke suddenly asked Michelle how Michelle liked the people she would be filming with, and if there were any writers among them. Michelle looked at him confused. She, trying to portray indifference, replied that there would be 3 other people with her: a female magazine editor, a male screenwriter, and a male model. Luke was very surprised that there would be a model on the set. He wondered aloud why a model would be there. Luke then started asking about who the man was and if he was handsome. Michelle suddenly jumped up sharply and yelled as if she was out of her mind. "No, not handsome at all. You're much more handsome." Luke even flinched at her reaction. Gesticulating vigorously, Michelle continued to describe how rude he was and how she didn't want to be filmed with him. She suggested that the guy had gotten the part inexplicably, since he wasn't popular at all. Luke just laughed. Michelle, on the other hand, smiled back and thought about how it would be nice if he smiled like that more often. She hoped that pretty soon the town would stop gossiping about them. The girl looked at Luke and their cozy home. Yes, she thought, this was where she belonged. The time was 16 hours and 48 minutes. Someone rang the doorbell. Michelle got up from behind her computer and went to open it. She assumed it was probably the editor and should have been greeted. The girl swung the door wide open, fully convinced that the editor was standing there. However, it was someone else. Michelle looked at the uninvited guest in surprise. It was a girl. She said hello and introduced herself as Sally Young. Luke came out to the guest as well. Michelle tried to ask him who the girl was. Luke said that he had just gotten a call saying that Chris, the editor, had been hospitalized. This news came as a surprise to everyone. "Is he sick?" queried Michelle. Sally Young clarified that it wasn't really an illness, more like overwork. She also added that he was suddenly admitted to the hospital this morning, so he couldn't go to work. Luke scratched the back of his head, puzzled. Sally clarified that he was now scheduled for treatment and had taken sick leave. They also had to divide the editor's work among his co-workers, which was why she was the one who had come in today instead of him. It is worth noting that the editor's full name is Chris Gilbert. He is 40 years old and an excellent specialist. After finding out the answers to the exciting questions, Luke invited Sally to come in. Michelle at this time was thinking that both the editor and the publisher were completely tactless. Even though she often met with Chris at her house, they hadn't even warned them that another editor was coming. Nevertheless, Michelle decided to be polite and offer her new acquaintance at least some tea. The girl served the tea to Sally, to which she was very pleased. Suddenly, Michelle's gaze fell on the book the girl had brought with her. Michelle knew that this book was written by her Luke. Michelle took the book in her hands and asked, "Is this a reprint? Does anything need to be changed?" However, Sally replied that she had brought this book to get an autograph from the writer. Realizing that this was a fan of Luke's, the girl decided to leave them alone. As she left the room, the girl mentally wondered why they had sent such an inconsiderate child. Just in case, Michelle decided to leave the door ajar. Michelle knew that Luke was usually stiff when meeting strangers for the first time, and she probably had nothing to worry about. But the fact that they had a young girl coming to their house worried Michelle a little. But honestly, she was also worried about what happened yesterday. After Logan had allowed himself a second kiss, Michelle had once again firmly pushed him away. The girl yelled at him indignantly, reiterating that she had already talked about having a boyfriend. She was even angrier that Logan himself had said he had a girlfriend. Michelle called him crazy, accusing him of purposely pretending to be a fan of hers in order to approach her. She was perplexed by this attitude of his toward fellow co-workers. Logan had been listening confusedly and silent the whole time, letting the girl say whatever she wanted to say. He then clarified that he had no intention of becoming Michelle's partner, but simply wanted to revitalize their relationship. He admitted that he liked Miss Ryder, noting that she apparently didn't like him very much. Michelle was just furious. She just didn't understand how anyone could behave like that, and even more, she didn't understand how he could say such a thing to her at all. The girl turned around angrily and left, trying to forget everything that had happened as soon as possible. Back at the cafe where the corporate party was, Michelle apologized and said that she didn't feel well. She then simply said goodbye and left. Michelle was remembering all of this sitting at her computer and was completely unable to concentrate. All these memories made her sad and prevented her from continuing to live a peaceful life. She thought about what she should have said to Logan back then. Michelle felt guilty that she should tell Luke about it, but she already knew in advance what his reaction would be. He'd probably tell her not to star there, and he'd remember to mention what he'd told her about the consequences of her decision to star. She also realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and her star would fade if she gave up so easily now. Therefore, Luke mustn't find out anything about that incident. Meanwhile, Sally was about to leave. Luke escorted the girl into the hallway and was about to say goodbye. Sally promised that she would pass on all of Luke's suggestions to the editorial office, and they would make corrections as soon as Mr. Chris was well. She also apologized for showing up unannounced, explaining that she hadn't known that Michelle would be here too. Luke reassured the girl, explaining that various editors had come to see them before. Lastly, Sally asked if she and Michelle were going to get married. Michelle could hear from her room everything they talked about. The question about the wedding made her tense up, as she really wanted to know the answer to that question too. Luke visibly tensed at Sally's question. The last thing he expected was to hear it from her. Sally smiled sweetly and waited to see what Luke had to say to that. Luke, after a brief pause, replied that he was getting married soon, but not yet. He reasoned that his older brothers were not married yet. Was it really just about brothers? Michelle stared puzzledly somewhere in front of her. Finally, Sally left. The door clicked shut. Luke knocked on Michelle's room, asking if she was awake. Not waiting for an answer, he decided to go in. Michelle was lying on the bed with her back to the door. As soon as the girl heard Luke enter, she immediately asked him to tell him not to send Sally to them anymore. She called her too annoying. Luke was confused by her words. He realized that Michelle had heard their conversation with Sally. Luke walked over and sat on the bed next to Michelle, trying to hug the hurt girl. In fact, Michelle knew the real reason for everything, and it wasn't that Luke couldn't get married before his brothers. The truth was that Luke's father, a world-famous writer named Joseph Martin, didn't like her. The girl realized that Luke cannot go against the will of his father, and from this is tormented. The guy decided to distract Michelle from unnecessary thoughts and fell the girl on the bed. She felt the pleasant heaviness of his body. Luke gently stroked her hair, bringing his face closer and closer to the girl to kiss her. He apologized for calling the editors home all the time and gave Michelle a peck on the cheek. But Michelle, that was clearly not enough. The girl's whole body had longed for those hands of her lover and those gentle touches. Michelle asked that Luke take her breast, pushing his hand lower and lower from her face. The guy was very obedient this time and wasn't going to object. Oh yeah, it had been a long time since Michelle had felt as good as she did right now. Luke admitted that he enjoyed it too. However, right after making love, Michelle got ready to take a shower and Luke retired to his room. That wasn't bad, Michelle thought already in the shower room. However, bathing under the powerful pressure of the water, Michelle still had mixed feelings on her soul. She was not completely satisfied. Returning from the shower, she once again fell face down into the pillow. The girl was uncomfortable with the fact that now, as had usually been the case lately, she and Luke had only done this because Michelle had asked. Should she have already admitted that the couple had reached a stage in their relationship where intimacy was no longer of much interest? With those thoughts in mind, she fell asleep. Oh, what was Michelle dreaming about? A young man, brunette. Except it's not her Luke at all. That creep has even gotten into her dreams. Right now, he's holding her head, staring into her eyes, coming closer and closer. He pulls Michelle forcefully to him and kisses her passionately on the lips, not letting go. Michelle begs Logan not to do this, but he is overly insistent. His kiss is filled with passion and desire, and the girl has no strength to resist. She also puts her arms around his neck, letting him know that she likes what he's doing. Michelle doesn't want Logan to stop at all. Their kisses are getting more passionate and hotter, and their caresses are getting more explicit. The guy doesn't hold back his urges, getting bolder and bolder and bolder. Michelle hadn't felt this kind of passion in a long time. In her dream, she did not feel remorse or shame. The girl succumbed to the wave of surging feelings and the pressure of a passionate guy, giving him all of herself without a trace. Yes, she was insanely pleased. How sensual and strong he was. His hands, his lips, his hair, his skin, everything drove her crazy. Michelle didn't want it to end. She wanted to experience the pleasure for as long as possible. Oh, I think the dream was over. The girl woke up shocked from her own dream. Oh shit. Michelle couldn't understand why she was dreaming about that asshole Logan. Although all of her thoughts lately had only been preoccupied with that incident at the corporate party. Michelle's phone, which was charging and lying nearby just on the bed, suddenly buzzed. It was the sound of a notification. And who could be texting her at this late hour? Wow. It was a message from Logan. He'd found her on Instagram, and through a message, he'd decided to apologize for that very day. What a surprise. The girl sat in a stupor, first that event at the cafe, then that candid and all too realistic dream, and now this message. Logan was beginning to take up more and more space in her thoughts, and it seemed life. A new day has arrived. Michelle is being interviewed for the first episode of her show. It was at this point that she was asked the question about how the girl felt when she received the offer to be on the show, Fireside Conversations. Michelle answered that she was both excited and worried, and even thought about turning it down. However, she felt it was her goal to bring the idea of solo camping to a female audience. That's why, and accepted their offer to participate. It was not the first time for Michelle to be interviewed, so she was not worried. The filming process was light, and there was a relaxed working atmosphere on the studio set. Campfire Conversations is a show based on socializing and camping. The 4 contestants will go on a short trip for 2 days and 1 night. The show will be filming next week. Michelle thought she was the only expert in their foursome, but the other contestants certainly had their own talents. Derek, the screenwriter, was a fisherman. He was a master of his craft, and boasted a lot of experience in catching fish. Editor Emma was a diver. She knew and loved conquering the depths of the waters. And the last contestant made Michelle wonder just what talents this guy had. She could now watch Logan getting his makeup applied. As it turned out, he had inherited his carpenter father's talent and was hired as a jack of all trades. Oh, he's got more plaster on his face than anyone in the fashion industry. Hell, he's still handsome though, that Logan. Meanwhile, a break was called on the set. Michelle wondered if she could go now. Mentally, she tried to adjust herself not to look in the direction where the hero of her recent dream was. The girl took a quick step off the platform, hoping he wouldn't follow her this time. She hadn't responded to that message of his last night. Michelle thought that there was no apologizing for what he had done via social media, though she didn't even consider accepting his apology. However, she still wouldn't be able to avoid him for long. Suddenly, the girl was called out by someone halfway through. It was the director, Holly. She brought Michelle some tea and asked if they could have a little talk with her. Michelle and Holly started drinking tea, discussing the weather, and the fact that it was only now that spring was really starting to make itself felt. Holly asked if the girl was worried a lot. Apparently, no matter how hard Michelle tried to look confident, there was no hiding it from the experienced director. Holly gave the girl advice to just be herself, as she was their dear expert. Michelle smilingly asked what Holly meant. The director replied that Miss Michelle was the first to be invited. How nice to hear such words from such a person. Michelle was just happy. Both of them had just finished their tea. Holly suddenly looked puzzled at the girl and said, My request may sound rather rude, but is it possible to ask the writer Luke Martin to become an invited guest of our program, if he would be so interested? Michelle stared at the director in surprise. God, well, why was this happening again? Michelle now felt like she was just a shadow of her boyfriend. Holly explained that it wasn't just a request, and if he agreed, they would accept any conditions and shoot a spoiler featuring him. Michelle somehow thought that's exactly how it would turn out. Michelle thought about it and said that Luke was unlikely to agree because he would be uncomfortable working with strangers. Besides, they promised each other not to advertise their relationship in public. Holly couldn't say anything to that. Besides, someone had just called her at that time, and she started talking on the phone. Michelle, on the other hand, once again got the impression that she was just being used as a ladder to get to the brilliant fiction writer. Meanwhile, Holly finished her conversation and said it was time for her to leave for the set. Michelle promised to return soon as well. After the director left, the girl still stood for a while, absorbed in her own thoughts. Now she felt deceived and used. Well, could she really be valued just because Michelle was Luke's girlfriend? She'd been so excited about the invitation for nothing. Michelle was still standing outside looking up at the sky. Her gorgeous hair was fluttering in the spring wind. It was warm and nice, but it felt bad. Michelle decided that it was time to head back after all. On the way, she thought about the fact that it would not hurt to prepare herself morally. The girl realized that as soon as the show would be aired, people would definitely start writing nasty things in the comments. And if you think about it, the director is only interested in the rating. As she pondered this, she saw Logan standing near the entrance. Michelle tried to make a nonchalant face and pretend like she didn't notice him. Yes, Michelle is a rock. Michelle is a rock. Miss Ryder! Logan all but called out to the girl. Michelle turned to the guy and icily asked him what he needed. For a moment, Logan just stared into the girl's eyes. Then he bowed and said he was truly sorry, even if Michelle didn't care. The girl asked in a stern tone if the guy knew he was a brat. The one lowered his head. It seemed like he was really sorry. Logan admitted that he was well aware of it, and he knew that no apology could make it up to him. How true, he realized. Michelle looked at him sidelong. After a little thought about where he should start, Logan admitted that he had just been slipped some soju and beer that time. He drank it all, and of course he got drunk. He went on to tell a surprised Michelle that he was so happy to hear about being on the show with a writer he likes so much. And then there was the alcohol just playing tricks on Logan. Michelle listened to all this and didn't know if she should believe the guy. Logan said that he sincerely did not understand how it could happen. That night, he saw that Michelle went out for some air and decided that this was his chance to talk to the girl. Right now, Logan was mumbling in desperation that he regretted his outrageous behavior in front of Michelle. He had stayed up all night feeling like a miserable bastard when he hadn't gotten a response to his message. Michelle was getting sick of listening to him. The girl stopped his self-abuse by emphasizing that they should forget about that incident and set themselves up for a good job. After all, they still had yet to star together after all. Logan gave a sweet look filled with gratitude, calling Michelle an angel. He bowed out again, promising that it wouldn't happen again from now on. Michelle pulled the guy back and reminded him that it was time for them to head back. Michelle was upset after her conversation with the director, but after Logan's apology, she was relieved. They really still have more filming to do together, so they should forget about everything. Logan listened to Michelle and followed her to the movie set. He breathed a sigh of relief. This conversation had been very difficult for him. After the interview with the crew was over, the real filming began. Red envelopes were placed in front of the participants, indicating the location of the first filming. Before opening these envelopes, the participants were asked to tell where they would like to travel to. Derek asked if their wishes would be honored if they said where they would like to go. However, this was more of a rhetorical question, after which the man immediately suggested fishing destinations like Costa Rica. Well, who would have doubted what a fisherman could have chosen? Editor Emma expressed her desire to go to any place where swimming could be practiced. You bet, for her swimming on a sunny day is the best activity. Derek looked at Logan and asked with a smile where their youngest member would like to go. Logan embarrassedly remarked that he hadn't been anywhere much, so he didn't care where he wanted to go. Derek wondered, were there really no places he wanted to visit at all? Logan scratched the back of his head and blurted out the first thing that came into his head. "Well, Africa then," he said. The producer gave the team a clue, explaining that the place was related to the title of this show. Emma speculated aloud that it could have been some sort of campground. Yes, Emma's guess turned out to be correct. The attention then turned to Michelle, remembering that she was more knowledgeable on the topic than anyone else. Someone even called her the Queen of Camping. The girl was a little embarrassed by the unexpected attention. Michelle was mentally grateful that she had been helped to join the conversation. So the girl took this chance and expressed the idea that the campground parking lot could be their first place. The producer remarked that Michelle was very close to the guess. However, the correct answer was a little different. Holly said she didn't want to keep everyone waiting any longer and offered to open the envelopes to the contestants. Those red envelopes looked very atmospheric and intriguing. Everyone couldn't wait to open them. Everyone opened the envelopes and were surprised. Derek and Logan froze in bewilderment. Emma didn't seem particularly surprised, unlike Michelle. She didn't really understand why the first place had to be here. It seemed very strange to her. In everyone's envelopes was a picture of the train station in Yongsan. That was where next week's meeting was to be held. Meanwhile, it was getting close to nightfall. It wasn't until 23 hours and 20 minutes that the filming finally ended. Emma and Michelle walked out of the building very tired and sleepy. It had been an interesting but still a busy and hard day's work. Emma clarified that she had understood correctly that their departure point would be Yongsan Station. Michelle replied that it looked like that was the case. The editor then asked Michelle to give her her phone number. She explained that last time at the corporate party, everyone had exchanged numbers, and since Michelle had left early, her number couldn't be taken. They must have all made friends by now, Michelle thought. Emma asked if the girl could be added to the general chat room, and Michelle, of course, was fine with that. The girls said goodbye, waving goodbye to each other and wishing each other a good journey. After the shoot, Michelle was in a great mood, although the director spoiled her mood with his request after lunch. However, in the process of filming, Michelle felt the good attitude of the group, and her mood improved significantly. All the participants seemed kind and nice, and Michelle realized from their attitude to her that they relied on her a lot. Closing her eyes, the girl dreamed. Michelle felt elated. It seemed that her dream of being seen as a separate person without being tied to her boyfriend was beginning to be realized. In a burst of emotion, the girl folded her hands as if in prayer and mentally asked the moon to help her succeed. "You haven't gone home yet?" Logan suddenly asked, coming up behind her. Michelle was a little startled. She answered the guy briefly with what was already obvious. Logan asked Michelle if she was driving today. The girl replied that she was in a cab today. The guy looked her straight in the eye and thanked her again for Michelle being so gracious to him today. His repeated apologies made Michelle feel uncomfortable. She reminded the guy that enough apologizing was enough, and it was time to pretend that nothing had happened as they had agreed. Logan looked downcast. He regretted undermining Michelle's trust so easily. Now, however, he really wanted to win it back. Logan even fell to his knees in front of Michelle, finally shocking the girl. Michelle asked him to stop all this and get up. Michelle assured him that she had forgiven him, and everything was really okay now. Then, she suggested that they go home. Logan wasn't going to let her go that easily. "If that's really the case, can I buy you a drink?" he asked, looking at Michelle hopefully. Michelle never ceased to be amazed at this guy's persistence. Meanwhile, in her and Luke's apartment, Luke was engrossed in his work process and was clicking his fingers on the keyboard with wild speed. He seemed to be afraid of losing his train of thought, so he was typing so fast that his brain was almost boiling. Finally, he was able to take a break to get a drink. "Oh yeah, much better now," thought the guy as he quenched his thirst. Luke was just happy. His inspiration had finally returned after weeks of crisis and creative stagnation. Now he was happy that he could immerse himself in his work again. However, it was already 1 o'clock in the morning. The boy looked at his watch anxiously, noting that his Michelle was running late. He wondered what or who could have kept her late at this hour. Another hour passed. Luke stared frantically at the monitor. He was getting more and more worried. It's 2 in the morning and she still hasn't come home. The guy was just reaching for his phone to call Michelle when he suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. Wow, what good timing. Yes, it was Michelle. She had come home satisfied and happy. Luke looked at the girl questioningly. Michelle wondered aloud why Luke was still awake. She hugged the guy, wrapping her arms around his neck, and complained that she was very tired today, and her legs were especially tired. Luke, also hugging Michelle, asked why she had come so late. After a moment, however, he pulled Michelle away from him, noting that she reeked of alcohol. Did they really have a party tonight, too? He waited for an explanation from the girl. Michelle replied that they hadn't had any parties tonight. 2 hours earlier, they had. Logan then offered to buy Michelle a drink. Michelle in turn asked if he wanted to do it right now. Logan replied that they could have a drink or a meal with Michelle anytime, not necessarily right now. Oh, and he also doubted that anything but bars were open at this hour. Michelle noticed that his request didn't seem quite right, and looked like he was asking her for a personalized meeting. The girl asked him to treat her the same way he treated everyone else. Having said that, Michelle turned around and was about to leave when Logan called out to her again. He suddenly blurted out that he wanted to confess to Michelle that his girlfriend really liked her. Oh, what a twist. Michelle expected to hear anything from him. However, this was clearly not the kind of confession she had expected. The girl stopped. She turned to Logan, asking in surprise what he meant. Logan explained that his ex-girlfriend was a fan of Miss Ryder. That was why Logan knew so much about Michelle. Michelle tensed up and nervously clenched her fists. It looked like it was going to be a night of revelations. Logan confessed that he had pretended to be interested in Michelle's work that night, having been drinking heavily. The girl clarified then, what did he mean about the Apollo? Logan didn't immediately understand what Michelle was asking him. Michelle clarified that she was talking about her novel. After all, Logan had then said that he had that book at his house, or had he lied about that too? Logan assured the girl that he had indeed read the book. Michelle somehow doubted the sincerity of his words. She thought about it for a second. Then Michelle decided to test the guy by asking him how he liked her novel. This question seemed to catch the guy off guard. He was puzzled. Apollo is a collection of science fiction short stories written by 10 writers who won a contest. Luke won the grand prize, and Michelle was one of the 6 who only received a consolation award. Despite Luke and Michelle's relationship, the moment the award was presented, the girl felt pathetic, realizing how different their abilities were. Since then, if anyone mentioned Michelle's short story, The Perfect Protector, that didn't get a good grade, she immediately remembered that humiliating past. So, mentally, the girl hoped Logan would give the right answer to her question. Logan thought for a moment, then said, "Dad is actually a robot, isn't he?" There was such an unexpected twist at the very end. Michelle noted aloud that Logan seemed to have actually read her short story. The guy indignantly asked who she thought he was. He also added that his girlfriend had told Michelle so much about the work, and he had read it very carefully himself. He then remarked that although he didn't remember all the details, he did have the book at his house. Logan also told him that his girlfriend was very jealous of Michelle's beauty and writing talent. Michelle, as she listened to him, thought it sounded like some kind of bullshit. The guy apologized for bringing it up, but he thought that since her work had been published, it definitely meant that it was successful. Michelle sighed and admitted that she had always wanted to be a novelist. Writing novels was her long-time and still unfulfilled dream. The girl pointed out aloud that Luke is a head above the rest, only because out of the 10 people who have published in the Apollo, he is the only one who continues to write short stories. Logan noted that he was sorry, but he hadn't read a single book written by Luke Martin. All he knew was that Luke was Michelle's boyfriend. Logan asked the girl if he was really as talented as people said he was. This question really pissed Michelle off. She didn't understand how it was that he could only know Luke as her boyfriend. What about Invitation to a Faraway Kingdom, The Price of Charm, The Eternal Game? You haven't read any of those books? The girl asked indignantly and in bewilderment. Logan was impressed by Michelle's such a violent reaction, but he hadn't read any of those books. Michelle wondered, since Luke's story in Apollo had won a major award. How could Logan not have read it? And more importantly, why? The girl's hands began to literally shake from an overabundance of emotions. The guy admitted that he liked classical foreign literature more. His girlfriend had only read Michelle's story in that collection, so he too had only read what she recommended to him. Logan apologized again, but he hadn't read any of Luke's books. Michelle was speechless, but she showed her emotions in all their glory. Was there really one other person who didn't know how amazing Luke Martin was? The guy noticed that it was getting pretty late and asked Michelle to let him stay with her until the cab arrived. Michelle didn't mind waiting for her transportation together. Logan noted that she was already talking to him the way she had been. He inquired if Michelle could be added to the group chat. Michelle replied that Emma had already promised to add her there. The girl also apologized for forgetting to be polite when talking to Logan. The guy said it was no big deal, and he didn't mind at all. Michelle thought about it for a while. Looks like she was going to say something to the guy. The girl looked angrily at Logan again and asked if he knew that last time she had to go home early because of him. Logan fell to his knees in front of Michelle again. He was very sorry for what he had done and promised he wouldn't act like that again. Well, is he serious? Michelle again asked the guy to come to his senses. Meanwhile, the cab car arrived. Michelle said goodbye to Logan and left. Already sitting in the car, the girl thought about everything that happened to her today. Yes, it had been extremely eventful. Only for some reason, remembering how Logan behaved today, she felt funny. Michelle was surprised, but at the same time pleased that the guy liked her novel, which Michelle herself considered mediocre. However, a complete surprise to the girl were his words about Luke. It was the first time she had heard that someone might not know about Luke's work. On the other hand, Luke's reputation is limited by his own readers. Despite all his popularity, there are some people who don't read the novellas and don't know his worth. Michelle was happy to have new people in her life and a whole new environment for her. She was certainly enjoying being in a situation where she herself could be the center of attention and not someone else's shadow. Oh yes, she wished she could savor that feeling for longer. Thinking this way, Michelle suddenly asked the cab to stop. It stopped just outside a convenience store. Michelle decided to treat herself to a low-alcohol drink. Here she was already opening the can in anticipation. She was in a great mood right now. Michelle really wanted to have a beer and chips, and she saw no reason not to. Sitting alone at the table, she remembered that she used to consider Luke her sunshine. She thought of herself as the moon, which could only shine because of him. Now she clearly understood that she had to make an effort to shine on her own from now on. So, let's go back to the moment when Michelle came home and Luke was waiting for an explanation from her. The girl explained that she was just tired and decided to have a drink at the convenience store next to the house. Luke was surprised that she was doing it alone on the terrace of the store so late. The guy stroked Michelle's head, noting that the shooting seemed to have exhausted her. The girl didn't deny that she was very tired, emphasizing that she still had to wait a long time for her shoot. Luke suddenly asked if he should take part in her show too. The girl was so scared to hear that. However, she tried to make a joke, telling him to only do the shoot if he was paid a lot of money. The guy just smiled back. In his own thoughts, Luke was thinking about this program being a great chance for him. At the same time, Michelle was mentally worrying that Luke wouldn't rob her of this chance. It was a beautiful starry night tonight. Meanwhile, Emma Black had added Michelle to her coworkers' group chat, Campfire Conversations. Logan was just getting home, and looking at the chat room, he noted that Michelle was indeed in the group as well. Lowering his gaze, he thought about how things had worked out pretty well. That story about his ex-girlfriend was a fabrication, and he was just lucky that Michelle believed that nonsense. Next, the guy started to remember some moments from his past. Yes, he was very different back then, wasn't he? For some reason, he suddenly remembered the young girl who said how handsome Logan was without his glasses. After all, she was the one who had given Logan the idea that he should start wearing lenses. That had been a different time, and Logan had looked completely different then. Thinking about the past made the boy sad. He desperately began to shake his head to push the intrusive thoughts away. God, why was he still thinking about her? Oh crap! The guy cursed quietly and continued on his way home through the dark streets of the night city. So, the long-awaited day of Michelle's first shoot came. Luke decided to give the girl a ride to the drop-off point. He also inquired if he needed to meet her on the way back. Michelle assured him that she would get back on her own. The girl thoughtfully looked at her reflection in the mirror. Today was the first shoot of the show with her participation. It's a little exciting. Luke should take her to Yensen Station. Michelle suddenly asked if Luke remembered how they used to drive to the campground from this same train station. They were still students then, and Michelle had organized the trip for them. It had been a surprisingly overcast day. As she and Luke were setting up the tent, it started to rain. Ah, those moments vividly appeared in the memory. Luke and Michelle hid from the rain in the tent. Ha 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 ha, it was pretty cramped in there. But despite everything, lying in the tent with the sound of rain was cozy. Then Luke remarked that listening to those sounds of raindrops was a special treat. Michelle couldn't help but agree with him. The cool rain outside couldn't spoil that warm atmosphere inside the tent. Ah, how romantic everything had been that day. Their hugs and kisses, the passion that had been between them seemed now something distant. Later memories of those times were reflected in Luke's novels. In distorted legend, Princess Monique and General Bruno hid in a cave from the acid rain. But the princess, watching the carnivorous plants reach for the raindrops and spread their petals wide, realized that no one else in the kingdom was suffering. Monique turned to the general, placing her hand on his chest. The general trusted the princess, who took his hand and led him straight out into the rain. The next scene in that story is the resurrection of the state by raindrops. Wow, this story, written by Luke, had Michelle very excited. That rain episode was her favorite. Luke made the point that even their camping trip came in handy in writing his novel. Ah, that trip was special to the couple, which is why it made it into the novel. Michelle smilingly remembered that it had been total chaos back then, but it had still been fun. Luke suddenly tensed up for some reason. He called out to Michelle, looking thoughtfully at the road. "I'm sorry, I've often been too rude," the guy said. What's wrong with him?" Michelle looked at Luke, puzzled. After thinking for a bit, Luke admitted that he wasn't thrilled about Michelle going on that program. That was why he didn't want to discuss her participation there. The guy expressed regret that he had behaved outrageously at a time when he should have been supporting her. His words came as a surprise to Michelle. The girl didn't know what to say to that and lowered her gaze in embarrassment. Michelle tried to cheer up Luke by promising that she would be back from the shooting soon. Finally, the car pulled up to the train station. Luke was impressed by the number of people gathered, and Michelle noted that many had already arrived before her. Luke suddenly asked if he could go and watch too. Isn't the editor supposed to be here today?" Michelle inquired, to which the guy replied that it would be in the afternoon. Michelle had no reason to object, so she said he could park and come over. Luke quickly parked the car. As he walked by, he noticed two people talking. They were discussing Logan. Luke listened. He had heard that name somewhere before. One girl was talking about how she had seen Logan up close and concluded that he was unreal handsome. Luke seemed to realize he was talking about the guy Michelle had described as tall. Ah, there he was. Luke knew immediately when he saw Logan that it was him. The guy definitely stood out in the crowd. Oh, was this really the handsome guy? Luke thought long-haired guys like that only existed in fantasy. But when you looked at him, he was normal. As he looked at Logan, Luke thought for a moment. His thoughts were interrupted by a man who warned him that no one was allowed in here. Luke clarified that he had come with Michelle. Meanwhile, Michelle noticed that Luke wasn't being let in and signaled to the guard that Luke was with her. Michelle approached Luke and cheerfully beckoned him to come with her. Luke hesitantly asked if he was sure he could come in here. The girl led Luke through the noisy crowd and suggested he see the producer. The guy was all for it, and he couldn't wait to find out when the shooting would start. Michelle noted aloud that it wouldn't be long now. She looked a little excited. A producer appeared up ahead. Michelle called out to her and Miss Holly turned around. As soon as the producer saw Luke, her face broke into a smile. "Oh my God, Mr. Luke Martin!" Holly exclaimed in a voice full of delight. Yes, Michelle understood her emotions. However, for Holly, this meeting was unexpected, so she was a little confused and tried to find a place for Luke and ask him questions at the same time. Luke was also confused. This behavior of the producer towards him seemed strange to the guy. Holly picked up on the fact that it looked like Luke had been brought in by Michelle and thought out loud that she should get his autograph at least. Luke bowed to the producer and asked him to take care of his Michelle. Holly assured him that it couldn't have been any other way. She then abruptly asked Luke to allow them to film his arrival on the set as well. Her request was very insistent, but Luke firmly refused the producer, promising to do it some other time. Holly tried not to show how angry she was at the guy's refusal. It was strange to her why Michelle was happy to bring Luke along, even though she was so reluctant to have him interested in her filming. As she pondered this, Holly noted aloud that Mr. Luke had some very interesting books. Fireside Conversations is an interesting show. In order to create unique characters for the contestants, The writers spelled out the revealing talents of each of them. They made sure to put Michelle at the center of attention. In the first episode of the show, all the contestants will have to support Michelle. According to Holly Brown, the face of Fireside Conversations is specifically Michelle. She is their star. Michelle, after taking that position, was immediately intoxicated by the attention, but it gave her the impetus to start shedding the Luke's girlfriend label little by little. Meanwhile, filming began and Luke got a chance to observe the process himself. Michelle was praised for her good exit. During the filming of Michelle and Logan's scene, it was suggested that they try to shoot a few takes. Luke, on the other hand, was listening to the conversations of the camera crew. When asked if things were going well, someone replied that celebrities can't turn out badly. "There's definitely nothing going on between them, haha," someone inquired jokingly. Maybe not jokingly? All this talk and questions Luke heard really puzzled him. The guy was standing behind the camera crew, and he looked very tense. You bet anyone would be tense from what he had heard. Anxious thoughts were not leaving him alone in any way. He no longer wanted to stay there and listen to all the things Michelle's co-workers were saying. Luke turned around and headed for the exit, mentally asking himself why his mood had turned so bad. The guy walked as if in a fog and thought that it would not hurt to change the situation. For example, to go to the movies or just to eat. Suddenly, he remembered that he had a meeting with his editor at 3. Caught up in his thoughts, Luke opened the car. He automatically got behind the wheel, buckled up, and all the while kept thinking about the way Michelle and Logan had snuggled up to each other during the movie. Luke was very uneasy, and intrusive thoughts kept popping into his head. Luke had always considered himself unsociable and fixated on one thing, and he had no choice but to love her, his groupie. Yes, there would hardly be a man who would remain indifferent at the sight of such a sweet and charming girl. Writing was slow and monotonous work, and Luke understood that as well as anyone. Luke frowned. When you leave and come home, it gets scary, because Luke began to realize how tedious and stubborn a scribbler he was becoming. While the guy was doing his self-exploration, someone honked loudly behind him. "Oh, you've got to be so thoughtful right in the middle of the road." Luke tried to shut off his thoughts and focus on the road. How much longer would he have to be so anxious? Finally home apartment. Luke tiredly plumped down in his work chair near the computer desk and noted to himself that it had been a long time since he had driven. The guy typed the name of the show into a search engine and noted disappointedly that Campfire Talk didn't even have its own website. Luke was very curious to know anything related to the show Michelle was on. She's probably on the train by now. Exploring the vastness of the internet, Luke did find some articles related to the show, and the first thing that caught his eye was an article about Logan Carey. Oh, that's the one. Logan's bio card included his date of birth, profession, height, and most importantly, a link to his Instagram page. So I wonder if he went to uni. Luke immediately clicked on the link. Oh my God, what is it? The first photo on his profile, and it features Logan along with his Michelle. The photo was posted only 5 minutes ago and has already gotten over 500 likes. After seeing this photo, the guy's insides tightened up. The worries that had plagued the guy before now doubled. A little earlier, Logan had proposed Michelle to take a joint photo. The girl saw no reason to refuse him. After taking the photo, the guy noted that it turned out pretty good and offered to send it to Michelle as well. The writers had given him a monopod, and now the guy wanted to use it to the max. After the photo with Michelle, Logan immediately ran to screenwriter Derek with the same request for selfies. Ah, youth, Michelle thought as she watched the guy's activity. While equipped with a shooting location, the actors had to just wait endlessly. All this preparatory work took a lot of time. What is filming? To learn the script and look for something to do while you wait for your turn. With such thoughts, Michelle took up the script to repeat it again. At that moment, Emma approached the girl. She asked Michelle if she was studying the script now. After Michelle answered in the affirmative, Emma praised the girl for her efforts. Michelle smilingly pointed out that it would be much easier if she learned the script and followed it. Emma wondered aloud at how responsible Michelle was with her work, unlike the others. Miss Emma is an editor, but from her Instagram, it seems like she's connected to cooking. Meanwhile, Emma whispered to Michelle if she knew Logan's ex-girlfriend. Girlfriend? Michelle interjected in an indifferent tone. After a second, however, she turned sharply and asked, Who's that? Michelle immediately remembered Logan talking about his ex-girlfriend and how she was an ardent fan of hers. Would it now be clear who he was talking about then? Well, of course, Michelle was eager to find out. Emma smiled and mused aloud that Michelle seemed to be very curious. However, the girl didn't deny it. However, she was curious about who this girl was, if she was famous, or maybe she was an actress. Emma leaned closer to Michelle and briefly told a story she had learned from an old model acquaintance of hers. Emma also added that they had been dating for quite a while, but only a few people knew about it. Michelle wondered after her words. I wonder, why only a few people knew about it? Maybe because she was a famous person? At these musings, Michelle was called out. They announced the start of filming on the set, and Emma hurried Michelle to hurry up and go to the others. Michelle looked at Logan and wondered. If everything she'd learned about his ex was true, then it turns out that her groupie was a celebrity? Should she just ask him about it? Or would it be wrong of her to ask about such a thing? Either way, Michelle really wanted to know the answers to her questions. She waited impatiently for the filming to finally end. The evening came. After an hour of flipping through the Campfire Conversations Instagram updates, Luke finally laid down to rest. Searching for information and trying to find answers to troubling questions appeared to take a lot of energy. Luke thought about the fact that maybe he was exaggerating, and all his worries were in vain. After all, in Instagram there were also photos with other participants. Now the guy was feeling very strange. It was as if he had returned to his childhood. The feelings he was experiencing now were as if he had checked out of the hospital and returned to school, and there he saw that his buddies had found new friends. It was a strange feeling. At this moment, Luke felt exactly like he did when he was a kid. At times like this in the past, Luke didn't bother his friends with questions about why they weren't playing with him anymore. He just shut himself in more and more. Now Luke felt even worse. Loneliness was literally enveloping him. He didn't know what to call what he was feeling at the moment, whether it was jealousy or not. But he definitely realized that he hated it to the point of horror when his Michelle was not with him by his side, but there, with others. Tears even ran down the guy's face from the swelling emotions. But how could he tell Michelle about all the things that were bothering him? At that time, someone rang the doorbell of his apartment. "Mr. Ryder?" Someone called out to Luke as he continued to hold the doorbell. Luke's guest was very insistent. Apparently, someone really needed to see him. Oh, it was Sally Young. And she was surprised that no one had taken so long to open the door for her. Sally thought no one was home. But finally, the door lock clicked and Luke opened the door, inviting Sally in. The girl immediately noticed that Luke looked unusual. Had something really happened? Maybe he was just in a bad mood. These thoughts made Sally wonder. Sitting in the apartment, Luke remarked aloud that it seemed that Chris, the editor, was still not well. Sally confirmed his words, but there was something else she had come with. Luke didn't let the girl finish, and he admitted that he wasn't feeling well today. Apologizing that Sally had to travel a long way, he hinted that there wouldn't be anything to discuss today. Luke wondered if the editor could come back another day. Sally agreed, as she could see that the guy was obviously upset or worried about something. A little miffed, the girl still headed for the exit. "I'm off. Get well," Sally said with a bow. Luke had nothing to say but apologies. However, Sally assured him that everything was fine and that today was just such a day. Finally, the girl gave a whole speech, promising to do her best for the writer, even if he was about to kick her out of the door. She emphasized that the editorial staff would wait patiently because Luke had worked so hard for their publishing house. Luke laughed at this impulsive speech. He laughed heartily, so much so that Sally felt a little embarrassed. The girl suddenly confessed that she had loved reading his books at the university. Now, to see him in this state of mind was like looking behind the scenes. Sally smiled embarrassedly. Her words surprised Luke. He was embarrassed by the girl's words, and he noted aloud that he wasn't really as amazing as he was seen from the outside. Sally didn't know what he was talking about. Luke clarified that he wasn't sick right now, just in a terrible mood because of the way things had turned out. Without realizing why, Luke suddenly began to explain to Sally the reason for his mood. He wanted someone to share his worries with, and Sally had just been in the right place at the right time. Luke admitted that nothing had even happened, but he'd been obsessed with his feelings. He was engaging in self-deprecation and empty anxiety time and time again. Luke called himself a miserable bastard. Sally was very surprised by such self-defeating behavior from her idol. The man's desperation made the girl panic. She didn't understand how one should behave in such a situation. Sally rushed to calm the writer, and holding out a handkerchief to him, asked him not to cry. Saying this, the girl herself wiped Luke's tears away. Sally was struck to the core by this situation. She didn't think that this man could experience and express such emotions. "You must be so vulnerable," Sally said, looking Luke straight in the eye. Then, she immediately added that she understood him. What she meant was that she understood what it was like to write novels alone, wandering around in her thoughts. Luke turned suddenly to Sally. He suggested that the girl come in again, so he could tell her something. So back to the moment when Michelle found out from Emma who Logan's ex-girlfriend was. Oh, as it turns out, she was world-class model Gwen Clapton. This girl was highly recognized both at home and abroad. Michelle had been watching her since the girl appeared on the show Model for Survival. She became a contestant at the age of 19, having lost 14 pounds for the sake of the qualifying round. Oh my God, 14 pounds? Gwen had a punchy personality. She exerted it on the show, due to which there was a lot of hatred from the viewers towards her. However, it was still Michelle who was rooting for Gwen at the time. Therefore, when Michelle found out that Gwen was a fan of her work, the girl's heart trembled. On the day of the set, namely during lunch, Michelle, of course, first of all, checked Gwen Clapton's Instagram subscriptions. But Michelle wasn't there for some reason. I guess it wasn't her, Michelle thought. Or maybe it was another one of his ex-girlfriends. As awkward as Michelle felt, she had to make sure. 1 hour and 30 minutes, the end of filming. Already on the empty set, Logan walked up to Michelle and complimented her on a great job. Michelle stood there hesitating. The girl was about to ask him about Gwen, but couldn't get anything out of herself. In the end, she just replied that Logan had done a great job too. Still, Michelle couldn't leave her questions unanswered so easily. She hesitated for a long time, not knowing where to begin her question, or if it was the right thing to ask. Finally, she admitted that she wanted to ask Logan something. "Your ex-girlfriend, who is she?" Michelle decided to ask after all. Logan was caught off guard by this question, and he just stared at the girl, not knowing what to say to her right off the bat. He asked Michelle why she was asking it. The girl smilingly replied that she was just curious about what kind of person she was. Michelle explained that she was very curious as to what had gotten his ex-girlfriend so caught up in her story. After all, even among Michelle's fans, there were hardly any who had read that story in the Apollo. Logan wondered. Michelle, on the other hand, waited impatiently to see what he would say to her. However, Logan held out his hand and said that if Michelle was so eager to know the answer to her question, it was $1. Ah, what a twist. At that, the guy had a nonchalant face. Michelle stood there confused and the guy with his hand outstretched. An awkward pause hung in their dialogue. Logan mewed awkwardly, assuming that Michelle didn't get his joke. Michelle simply replied that she didn't know how to properly understand his words. To brighten the awkwardness of the situation, Logan suggested that the girl take a walk. Michelle agreed. They walked together past the tent spread out on the movie set. It seemed like there was someone else here now besides them. Emma noticed the two of them walking. This picture clearly puzzled her. Meanwhile, Michelle and Logan were walking side by side in the night alley. For a while, they just walked in silence. Each was thinking about something different. Finally, Logan asked if Michelle had heard of Gwen Clapton. Michelle admitted that Emma had told her about Gwen. Michelle forcefully asked if that was the girl that Logan had told her about earlier. Logan confirmed that it was that girl. Michelle thought he answered her somewhat reluctantly. The girl apologized, suggesting aloud that Logan didn't feel like talking about her. Michelle explained that she'd been rooting for Gwen since her appearance on TV. And after learning that Gwen might also be a fan, Michelle was so excited that she didn't think about Logan's feelings. It didn't take long for the guy to think of what to say back to Michelle. "Wow, if Gwen heard that, she would be over the moon," he said, and immediately added that Gwen wasn't just a fan of Michelle's. Michelle was perplexed. Logan, carelessly kicking a rock with his foot, admitted that he had lied to her about Gwen being a fan of Michelle's. He justified himself by saying that he couldn't tell the girl the truth at the time, for fear of hurting her. Then Logan added that in fact, Gwen was just obsessed with Michelle. The guy chucklingly continued to reveal that Gwen was the kind of person who was overly fond of self-criticism. Logan emphasized that he didn't know if she had gotten over her addiction or not. "Ha! Sounds like this guy is just messing with Michelle. Soon they returned from their walk and dispersed each to their own tent. Lying in bed, Michelle thought about their conversation. He said they couldn't part on a good note, but Michelle just wanted to satisfy her curiosity after all. The girl was tossing from side to side, and she was having trouble setting herself up for sleep. Michelle blamed herself for daring to ask Logan that question. Yeah, she probably shouldn't have asked. Suddenly, Michelle was called by Emma. She was lying on a bed in the same tent as Michelle. Emma sat up on the bed and, surprised that the girl was still awake, suddenly asked if Michelle had something with Logan. Emma also picked up on the fact that she and Logan had been alone for a long time. Michelle jumped up abruptly. Shocked at such an unexpected question, she began to explain to Emma that they had just taken a walk with Logan after dinner. "What a liar you are! You could have taken a walk with me. There's something between you two, isn't there?" Emma couldn't calm down. Michelle looked at the girl with a nonchalant look and found nothing else to do but repeat Logan's joke that the answer to her question was worth $1. Emma was taken aback by such an answer. She just looked at Michelle and sighed disappointedly. Emma laughed, noting that this joke of Michelle's was so old. Michelle bowed, mentally pleased at her cleverness. Emma smiled again and said that she would be rooting for her and Logan anyway. Michelle tried to assure her that there was nothing between them that Emma thought there was. Michelle then tried to shift the focus by asking if Emma might be the one with an interest in Logan. However, Emma countered that he was too young for her. Michelle just smiled at her words. The girl was aware of the editor Emma Black. She is a woman of rather broad views. Emma once even had her own column where she wrote about sexual relationships. Michelle understood Emma's questions and innuendos. But why is she asking this knowing that Michelle has Luke? And after all, Michelle hadn't even texted him once all day. Michelle stood up and headed towards the exit of the tent, signaling that she needed to step away for a bit. Emma couldn't resist asking if Michelle was going to a secret meeting with Logan. The girl replied that she was just going to the restroom. Michelle went outside and sat down on a bench. She dialed Luke's number, but all she heard in response were lonely beeps. Luke wasn't picking up. Maybe he was just sleeping? Michelle decided not to call again so as not to wake Luke up if he was sleeping. She hoped that his meeting with the editor went well. The girl got up from the bench and spread her arms and took a deep breath. The air is so pleasant at dawn. As she walked back to the tent, she thought about the fact that it was good to spend some time apart from each other. She and Luke were together all the time as it was. Back to the moment when Luke was upset with Michelle. At that time, Sally tried to support the man. Luke was surprised that the editor understood his difficulties. He beckoned Sally to re-enter the apartment. At the time, it seemed to him that he just had to trust Sally, or rather, he really wanted to trust. A call from Michelle. Luke reached for the phone with consternation in his eyes. His hand hovered over the phone screen in indecision. Luke didn't know what he would say if he picked up the phone. Next to Luke's bed, Sally was getting dressed. She assured him that the guy shouldn't answer the phone. What a picture. Did Sally confuse the word support with sleep with? Sally stood half naked in front of the mirror. She turned to Luke and explained that if he picked up the phone now, they would be exposed. Looking at the girl, Luke noted that not even in his wildest dreams was what had happened to him today. However, he would have to act like nothing had happened. In the meantime, messages came in from Michelle. She apologized for not calling sooner and wished him sweet dreams. Michelle is supposed to arrive tomorrow afternoon after all. Realizing all that he had done, Luke suddenly felt sick to his stomach. His heart pounded frantically, throbbing in his temples. She won't know about this, will she?